Francie Rawlings is not just a very dear friend, but someone who is accomplished a lot in her career. And it's not been because necessarily people gave her breaks, but she has a passion for helping people and has applied her technical knowledge to a field that really, really needs support like that, the healthcare industry. So, Francie, thanks for joining me here.
Oh, Kimi, thank you so much. And it's so much fun to continue not only having a personal relationship, but a professional exchange with you. And it's been a great journey. I mean, I think we met maybe what, 4 or 5 years ago, something like that.
I know it's been forever. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, there's an organization called SIM Women, which is about the Society for Information Management special interest group made up primarily of women executives in the IT environment. And they hold annual events, and I was a speaker at one. And Francie, I think you were on a panel and in the audience, both.
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And see what happens when they glom onto somebody, they just move it away. So, Francie, our topics are mostly about leadership. And one of the reasons why I asked you is because you have a strong sense of your leadership responsibilities, but you don't hit people over the head. It doesn't mean that you have a strong leadership manner. So could you tell me about one thing that you learned in your leadership journey, and it was so valuable that the experience was far more important than any little helpful hint that somebody might have given you along the way?
Yeah, and this was such a great question and made me really kind of reflect. Like, so when did I start thinking about leadership, and when was it something that I took on? And I will say it goes back a number of years, probably maybe decades, when I was working at Wyeth. Yeah, right out of high school, right? I was working at Wyeth, and our CEO at the time initiated this really impassionate program about leadership at every level. And something that came to heart for me was he gave presentations personally. He did great videos that we all, watched. And I really felt like through that direct communication, I started to understand that leadership wasn't just at the CEO level or the VP level. And he explained it in a way that really was palatable for me to understand how I could start to be a leader, even in the role that I played in the organization where I was currently working. And so it always gave me the sense of I didn't have to always look to someone else to direct me in terms of what my next leadership step should be or what I should do that would be leaderful. I really had to look within. And that really was kind of a changing point for me and something that always stuck with me, leadership at every level, which I think we hear a lot now. But back, 20 years ago, when it first came across my, radio waves, I was like, wow, you mean I don't have to wait till I'm the CEO to be the leader? And then to be honest, Kimi, I then started to really think about it in my own life. I need to be leaderful. Like, I need to decide what I want to do with my life, not just as a career, but do I want to live here? Do I want to live like this? And to take that initiative and not wait for someone to come along and save me, like Prince Charming or something like that. Not that they don't exist, but at the same time, that responsibility. And as a result of really embracing that kind of at a cellular level, working in the healthcare industry, it has helped me in terms of a lot of the challenges that I've had. Do I do this? Do I do not that? What's the leaderful thing to do? Because I am a leader, at every level in my life.
I kind of wonder how much of an impact do you think that has had also on your style of leadership? Because being a leader doesn't mean that you're going to push your way into every single thing in the organization, but it does mean that most people have developed a style of demonstrating and exercising their leadership. How much did that kind of evolutionary growth of your awareness of the power of your personal leadership. How much did that play in how you developed your own personal style of leadership, do you think?
I think it's another great evolution of the question too, because taking that information at a fairly young age, I, evolved my own leadership style through a little trial and error. There was the first I volunteered for everything. I'll do every committee. I'll own it. All of that sort of stuff. And I realized that's not really kind of working for me physically, emotionally, and maybe even professionally, because you wear yourself out. So there was a piece around, I don't have to necessarily volunteer for everything. So I kind of adjusted and was a little bit more strategic. And then the other piece was, sometimes I can be the leader of a team that I'm not actually leading. And I saw this more when I gave opportunities to other people to take on the role of kind of being the head of the team, but that you could still have a leadership role in the way that you talked and you collaborated and you got everyone to be engaged. And so that was another evolution. Like I didn't always have to be leading it or sticking my hand up, but that there was a way that I could ask really good questions, help to get everybody, engaged and collaborating, and almost be a good team member, among the team. And that was an even better piece to help the whole leadership of the initiative be carried out. And then there were some other situations where I learned that, sometimes just saying I'm a leader and not actually doing it was another thing. I had to make sure that wherever I went, I said it and I did it. So there was a little bit more of that evolution as I kind of took different positions in the organization, but also different positions in teams and committees, both internally and externally, and really understanding, what it means to be a worker among workers, despite your title or your role or your style. And for me, I always watched other leaders in my organization, and I generally looked up to a lot of them, and I scrutinized them because there were often times I was like, wow, that person is that role and I don't see it. Right. So maybe I'm like I'm telling truths on us, but I'm pretty sure we've all gone through organizations or situations where like, wow, how did that person get to be that VP? And to be honest, those are the people that I worked harder to understand more, that I either reached out to have a coffee with, or that I even asked to be my mentor, because there were things that I was just blind to in terms of the leadership journey and the styles. I will say I went through one program, and I'm an extrovert, if you can't tell that already, those of you that are watching. So I have no problem going to the room, having a conversation, meeting people. I really enjoy that. But that's not always the most attractive style when you work amongst people that have other attributes that tend to be more reserved, more analytical, more thoughtful, that take more time to come through with things. And when I went through this, I went through a leadership program fairly early in my career that was part of the SIM program. That's how I got engaged with those guys. And I got to see some people that had a more introverted approach to leadership, that had such a better command of the room than I did, because when they got up and spoke and when they took the time to articulate their thoughts or give their direction, everybody listened. And I was like, wow, that is really, really interesting. And I appreciated that. And again, that was another, jot it in my book. It's probably not something that I'm going to be able to adopt fully, but I did take that concept of like, you don't always have to raise your hand and have an answer. Like you can let other people speak. And then when you think it's, really important, add to it. So that's another, evolution, and knowing that I don't have to, as a leader, tell everybody what to do. The team pretty much does it themselves. Oftentimes later in my career, I was more of the girl, the cleaner. Like I cleaned the path. I was the person that said, what do you need me to do to make it happen? Because you guys are going to make it happen. I will clear the path. I will figure out how to move things around for you. Tell me what it is. That's my role. I'm going to help you get it done, that kind of thing. So it shifts a little bit. I didn't always have to be the idea maker or the cheerleader or the, omniscient, leader. But all of those different experiences led to, where I am today, really, supporting and driving leadership for women in particular.
And that is a cause that we both share. And I have to say, when I think about it, that required a certain amount of courage and a really strong understanding of your own value. Because otherwise, looking at situations and inviting people to help you understand something that just, I would never have done it that way. And so you invite people to help you understand that perspective could be considered threatening if you didn't have a strong sense of value. But even with a strong sense of value, I suspect it occasionally took a little bit of courage.
A lot of courage and a lot of confidence. And I will say, as much as I absolutely despised going to private girls' school my entire, elementary through high school, there were some amazing attributes that I developed as a result of being in a single sex school. I never hesitate to raise my hand. I never think it's not okay for me to have an answer. Actually, I think it's required of me to show up, prepared for anything because I may be called on. We worked under a lot of that Socratic method where, you were asked and you better have the answer or an answer. And I played a lot of team sports. So, for me, I was on the field. I always participated. I didn't sit in the bleachers. So I take a lot of those very early learnings. And it's the whole unconscious. I had an unconscious bias that I should always ask a question. I shouldn't worry about if I'm the only girl in the room. And sometimes that was not taken, as you said, as well as it could have been. One of my first jobs, I was one of 19 in a software development group, and I was the 19th hired, and I was the only female, and that was a tough year and a half for me. I don't have brothers, so again, I mean, I did go to a big university and I had that exposure and all that sort of stuff, but it was definitely interesting to understand, and that was a very good educational piece for me, to sort of understand how do you work with men. And it was an interesting group of men. So I take all of that and really appreciate those moments where I was conscious and confident to say, no, I don't think that's okay. Or I will try harder not to always point out the flaws, which, I learned that that's not something you bring out very often with men.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because as a woman, I wanted to get in there and okay, let's dig through this. Let's figure out what's wrong. And they're like,
solve this.
Time out. No, time out. We're going to take the approach of moving forward. This is how we're going to do it. I'm like, okay. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the Socratic method because during the pandemic, I've been doing even more reading. I wasn't actually sure that was possible, but apparently I have. And one of the things that I've wondered is with the different approaches in philosophy and in psychiatry, I was wondering if it wouldn't make a cute series of articles, the Socratic project manager, because I do believe that one of our strongest roles is facilitator, clearing that way, removing the obstacles, and sometimes teasing out of people what the obstacles are, because man or woman, there are certain people who are going to really dig in their heels and they're not going to want to ask you for help when you're poised and you're ready and you're eager to provide that kind of support to them. So you've worked with a lot of different technology-based fields. I mean, let's face it, in your leadership journey, you've been in an environment that is, I would say, sometimes much more heavily regulated than anything else that a lot of people that I speak with, have experienced. But what do you think is within an environment that is so heavily regulated and structured, and there is a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things? What do you think are the main challenges for project managers to actually be seen as leaders within the organizations they serve? I mean, you've been one of those people who has always encouraged that in the project managers who've worked for you or with you. But what do you think that we could do to kind of enroll a couple other folks besides just you in seeing us as leaders?
Um, well, I'll say something just about the regulated industry, right? And for those of us that work in it and really work it,
Yeah.
we know it's regulated. We know what's required. We have all the SOPs, we have the documentation, we have the requirements for the filings. That's not the challenge. It's the mentality of if it's regulated, you can't do anything, which is not true. I mean, you look at everything that's actually happened, even more so as a result of COVID, that people have really started to say, like, it's regulated, we follow the rules, and we can do it. And so in some of those respects, it's, really having a project manager that knows what the goal of the project is and really advocates. Are we doing the best thing? Are we making the best choices? And some of that comes with having a project management attitude of, I'm not an administrator. I'm not here just to sort of fill in the numbers or check the boxes.
Or nag
I'm
you.
not there. Oh yeah, I'm not here to babysit you or track you, trace you down, and in my opinion, the ability, and we've seen this as a result of being so remote for the last year, really leveraging communication styles, platforms, opportunities, right? So instead of just thinking, well, I'll get the status the hour before the weekly meeting and then we'll talk about it. Well, that's never going to let you talk about what's really going on. You're just going to sort of like look at the picture, and nobody's going to come and say, well, we're doing well, we're not doing well, well, we need to think about doing better. And then when you are asked about that, it's like, well, we'll have to have another meeting to talk about that. Well, that defeats the point of what I think a status meeting should be, right? So some of the things that I've always encouraged and I've tried to demonstrate as, either leading the project or being, a program manager or project manager, is to be more of a collaborator, to develop relationships with everybody on the team, to understand what their drivers are. And then as the project manager, make sure that I'm always communicating, where are we going? What are we doing? Where are our goals? So often when you're like 3/4 or halfway through the project, things start to get like, very diluted, and you really have to pull it back together to make sure that you can knit it and get over the finish line. And, I mean, I'm probably overgeneralizing, but for me, and I think it really, in a way, this whole COVID thing, although it was challenging for us from a healthcare and a safety perspective, it's really helped us augment our skill sets as workers among workers. I don't think we all like being so remote, but I certainly have gotten better at being able to pick up the phone or have a quick Teams chat or do a Zoom call, and have someone who worked mostly globally for the last 6 years of my life. It didn't seem that odd to me, but I know that it sort of ramped up a lot of other people's lifestyles and sense of engagement. But I think, and it's one thing that I remember being asked when I was interviewing for a very early early project management job, and the interviewee asked me, "What do you think is the most important skill set for a project manager to have?" And I still believe it's communication. It's communication skills. It's understanding communication pathways and being able to use them yourselves. Like for me, don't underestimate those meeting minutes that go out like right after the meeting, or the ability to continue to have those key, one sliders that tell everybody, here's what we're doing, and be a champion. So I think we underestimate that title, project manager, because they shouldn't be administrators. They're really managing the project. And that means being an advocate for it. That means understanding where everybody is, including stakeholders, as well as the work stream leads. And so, for me, I still think that if we get out of that sort of that idea that project managers are just people that do spreadsheets or Microsoft projects, and we get them in that role of they're the orchestrators of the symphony that you're trying to create with this project.
Oh, I like that analogy. So two of my favorite folks in the project management community, and I will give them both credit for making sure that the talented women that I know are also put front and center in both of these efforts. One is Oliver Lehman, and he founded something called the Project Business Foundation. And he's saying, look, you need to better understand the nuts and bolts of the business around your project and the impact that your project is going to make on that business. And Antonio Nieto Rodriguez goes a step further and says, you make yourself an apprentice so that people are talking to you about which strategic initiative, which strategic objective your particular project is supporting and is going to advance. So it sounds like a little bit like what you actually just encapsulated in one.
Yeah.
Direct.
You took it up another notch, but that's exactly what I mean. And we didn't do projects that didn't have a strategic alignment. We weren't allowed to, because we went through a whole vetting, and we finally got a project prioritization thing going, because you work in a huge organization and you have business clients that come with you, and I want to do this, and I want to do this, and yet you only have so many resources.
Right.
And so you do have to have a vetting piece to make sure that whatever effort you're putting into it as an individual or as a team, it's really going to add business value. And to your point, you need to be able to speak to that. You need to be able to understand that, and that is, you need to be able to drive the business to continue to deliver on it too.
And I liked what you said about being an advocate. You cannot be an advocate for something that you aren't even aware is connected to what it is that you're trying to do. And then you have to understand the impact. Then you can be a powerful advocate. You can also do a better job of risk management because you can see where possible pitfalls might be.
But I also think it also starts to shift the project manager out of like that person that's kind of a glorified secretary, or was for a number. And I'm not saying that, but there are times when we say, oh, we need a project, the perception of that, really. And to be that person, because a lot of times people say, well, I was just a project manager. I'm like, yeah, but what projects did you do? Because like, my goodness, I can help you spin that thing in terms of changing like what you deliver, the impact that you had as a result of the project that you brought to life. And in our industry, bringing projects to life was no easy feat. Some of these took years to deploy, at least in the R&D and in the medical side where I worked. Now on the commercial side, it was just the opposite. I had to take a year-long project and get not on like the COVID piece, but not as impactful yet. So that's amazing what they did there.
It is. I'm in awe. And having done a little bit of boots on the ground kind of work in what at the time we were calling biosciences. God, that was a long time ago. And having to sit through a couple of project management office prioritization and vetting meetings, I remember thinking, oh my God, what they have to go through just to get a project initiated. But I have to say, having come from a slightly different organization, I thought it was great because you could not have a business client in your organization forward a pet project, it had to actually bring real value. It could not be just, oh, well, so-and-so has, this many zeros behind their paycheck and that kind of title. So clearly we need to do whatever they ask. It's a very democratic process, prioritization. So I think that's kind of cool.
And it is an interesting discipline because we had to really make it a discipline because you have all of these clients and 100,000 people working in an organization and they're like, well, I have to do this. My market needs this. My patients need this. And you're like, okay, but where does that fall? And, do you have the budget and all of those kinds of things? And then do we have the resources? Because there were a couple of times where we were so active that, although we would augment staff, to actually lead it, we wanted to have one of our own teams. So, and it's hard, particularly since working in technology has taken such a front and center position, and project management of technology projects is so, valuable that everybody wanted to do one, particularly when we got into all of the iPhone apps or the Android apps or, chatbots. I mean, everybody's like, I have to have an app. I have to have a chatbot. It's sort of like, okay, so let's talk about this. Yeah. We build a lot, but it's, again, we don't want to go through this whole thing where we build it, they will come. That doesn't do anything for you as a project manager. And you need to be really careful about that, and make sure that you do have something that's aligned to a business value, because that project's going on your CV.
Or is being buried somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've been spending a lot of time, particularly this year, I think this past year, because we've had a lot of time to reflect, but we've also been more of a witness to some of the things that, oh my heavens, is that still going on, really? But I think it's always worth remembering what we have to celebrate.
Yeah.
So, what kinds of positive signs of progress have you seen, whether as a professional who represents a minority opinion in an organization, a technologist, or a woman leader? What are the things that you celebrate?
It's such a great question because I was thinking about that one. I just, last week was International Women's Day, or the whole week was the celebration. And I have to say, I don't remember that when I was in my 20s or 30s, right? So we didn't have that sort of celebration, even of women in general, let alone women internationally. And to participate, and I had an opportunity to participate in a couple of different events that week. It was so much fun. And I know it was taking a day or a couple hours out of my week, but I reaped amazing rewards getting to sort of sit and listen to some really, tremendous women from across different industries, different organizations, talk about, current challenges, where they're going, how they're managing this, things like gender equity, the whole diversity and inclusion strategy. What does that really mean? How are we going to make that really work? And just feel more engaged and really inspired by all the women that are in different levels and doing so many amazing things. I also got a chance during some of those where we had little lounge and chat sessions to share ideas. We were sharing books, we were sharing, contacts. We were talking about, how does one do something? So it was really, really interesting. And I think I, got a whole bunch of LinkedIn contacts as a result of that. Just new friends, possibly new connections that, like ours, Kimi, will carry on for a couple of years. But just really inspiring. There's something to be said about being inspired, because, what gets you up every day? You have to get to the job, you have to pay your bills. But there are moments where you think, wow, that person, created that platform for that rare disease, and she's, doing amazing, insights for that certain population. I'm like, I should get up and try and at least do something today, and it, not to minimize anything that I do, but I just really appreciate everything that I just had the opportunity and like surround sound to hear about that never, and I think of all the girls that are in their 20s and 30s now hearing this, being inspired by this, having this feeling like, well, I really can do anything and I can stretch myself. And that was just a great week for me. The other thing I've been doing, not unlike you, I did a lot of reading, because, I'm sort of stuck at home for a year. And I also take classes, like and they're all kinds of classes. Let me just tell you, they're all different kinds of classes. I just finished a knitting class. And the reason I say this is I was in this knitting class because someone that I take a Pilates class with says, I'm going to do a knitting class. So I was like, oh, I'll do that. But you meet people that you would never meet before. And I met a woman who's an oncology nurse. And so I'm, doing some work with her as a result of that offline. But I also have a nice new scarf from some really interesting wool that came out of someplace in New Hampshire. And, I started a class for, back at Columbia, but it's virtual, for, digital marketing and social analytics, because I still think, where we are now, I need to get better at understanding the new landscape, right? And how do we speak to it? How do I understand it? How do I know what people are asking questions of me as their partner to get answered? So some of that's really, really important. And the other thing that I've had to do is someone that's, I was always running around prior to COVID. I was moving around and going places, and I had a global job. And it's interesting when you have to just sit with yourself for a while. It's uncomfortable. For me, it was very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Yeah. And I recently had to take up meditation because I just don't know how to get comfortable. Now I know how to sit. I'm really good at Netflix. I know all about, Hulu and Amazon Prime. You name a show, I've probably seen it. But that's not just sitting and being comfortable. That's still sort of, in my opinion, it's sort of desensitizing me, or
intellectual pacifier.
Yeah, that's an even better word for it, right? So my new goal is if we're going to still be in this remote, environment, how do I get more comfortable and more present in being, remote? And I think that's important in terms of growth and still wanting to play in the game. And there's, be someone that can be inspiring and not distracted. And so those are some of my little forays into keeping myself engaged and inspired and inspiring.
And I think you're right about the community. I think there's always been communities of people who have very focused common interests. But the organizations that have been cropping up and the places where you and I speak, or we present, or we are on panels, or we just attend because, wow, look at these speakers.
Right.
There's a whole different energy to being one of a room of 400 or 300 or, well, back in the day, nearly 1,000. Other women who take not just their personal growth seriously, but also are looking for ways to, at a holistic level, grow and expand their leadership and expand their minds and look for places that they haven't gone before intellectually, but wow, that sounds interesting. Now let's go. I have to confess, it would never have occurred to me that you were meditating.
Right.
You really are a kind of a ball of fire.
I'm early in the journey. Like, this has only been, something that I've adopted in the last year. And the people that I follow, they've been doing it for decades. I'm like, okay, all right.
I had a friend who served in foreign service for the United States government, and we were deeply saddened when he passed. He'd been doing yoga since he was in his 20s, and yoga, as you know, is a very meditative physical practice. And a mutual friend and I were kind of laughing and crying about it at the same time. When he passed in his mid 70s, he looked better than in death than half the people who were in that room to say goodbye to him. Um, because he had a sense of self and a sense of where he fit in the lives of other people and alongside of other people. So I think this year has given us an opportunity in many ways to explore those kinds of things. You mentioned the people in their 20s. And if you were able to whisper some bit of counsel in the ear of someone who was just starting out in a role in technology and looking to be a leader in that role, whether it's they're starting out because they're 20 or they're starting out because, wow, that seems so interesting, or what I had been doing is not possible anymore. Maybe I can try that. So those people who are starting out and looking at technology and leadership in technology with aspirations and a little bit of ambition, what would you whisper in their ear?
Wow. Well, and it's a great question because I've had a couple of young mentees was when I was at my last big company, and I so gravitated towards them because they had the skill set that I didn't have, but I had a skill set that they didn't have, which is I knew how to navigate the organization. They were all data scientists or, specialists in something like really profound. Graduate degrees and all this kind of stuff. So I immediately said, all right, let's work together. And so the 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 interesting thing I found was these were really, really talented people who sometimes came into old corporate structures, which my company was an old, traditional organization, and they kind of bring you down at an entry level, even though you may have a master's from Harvard or Yale or, and to be honest, that's a better credentials than I have at this point, but I'm working on it. And they would do the work and they would think they would get promoted. And unfortunately, in our organization, it just didn't work out that way. And the managers weren't really good at managing or challenging them or actually explaining that to them. And so there were times where I said, well, know your worth, know what you want to do, look at the organization, be smart, look at the organization. There are areas where you do get promoted. Is there an opportunity in a large organization to go over there, still taking your skill set, but look, listen, and then leap. And some of the women, stayed, some of the women went out, but they all did it with a better awareness of like taking an evaluation of where you are, and understand why it is that you want to be there. I picked working, I had a little mantra of myself is like, whatever I'm going to go and do, I'm going to go and work at the best place for that kind of job. So I worked at Wharton, I worked at Wyeth, I worked at Pfizer, I worked at a couple other entities, and that worked for me. Because if I'm going to do something, find the best place to go and do it. And then what I learned along the way that I kept telling these wonderful women was watch what goes on. Really watch what goes on. Ask questions, but then watch what happens after you ask questions. And then decide, is this someplace that I really want to stay? Is this someplace where I think I'm going to continue to get my needs met? Because it's not a one-way street. And understand what your needs are. Like if you want to move up fast, go someplace small and really iterative. Don't go into a large huge Titanic-like organization that has many decks and, a lot of different philosophies on how people are moved. Now, I think a lot of the organizations, and the one that I just came from was, the population was, in the heavier side was between 40 and 60, right? And so we made a big effort to pull a lot of young people in. And so I'm really excited to see all of that infusion, and that may shift how people get promoted, how people get recognized. I think that my experience was the younger generation wanted to get recognized sooner and quicker. I remember spending many weekends and nights, working as, a paralegal or whatever my career was at the time, putting in the time. It's shifted. I think people have a different skill set when they come. They do their job, they do it really well, and they want some sort of progression model. And that's forcing a lot of our older organizations to rethink how we, pull people in.
I think that it's important what you said about recognizing their contributions, because there is a little bit of a generational myth that suggests that people are asking for awards of some kind and they want a big hoo-ha. And no, they just want to know that you know what they did and that you recognize the contribution that their accomplishment made to the organization. They're not looking for fireworks, but just an acknowledgement, which, if you get right down to it, you shouldn't have to look for that.
No. A good leader will identify that and will amplify that. I mean, I think that's another big piece. And we always we did this in a couple of my teams where I thought it was really good. You kind of created your own little 4-box, and two of the things in those 2 sections in that box were what motivates you and what demotivates you, which I thought was really important for leaders to know about their team and for people to know about themselves. And a lot of times I had to go through that whole exercise because I thought when I was going through a job change that it was money that motivated me, but then I thought, no, it's actually the work that motivates me. It's what am I doing is impact, but motivates me, recognition. I want to know that, what I did is being seen and in some form, and not have to, I don't, and then the other thing that demotivates me, which is another thing that I think project managers have to be really on top of, is people throwing people under the bus, and and that's something that I've never tolerated, on my teams or in my, in my person. And it's not always easy. I've had to bear the brunt of some vendor that I hired didn't do something, but I hired them. They were on our project. I had to stand up for it. And I think, understanding, like you said, what motivates you? And that's really a good question. You don't really know until you get some experience under your belt. So, I was also like, ladies, like, give yourself a break, like, have some fun, do some great work. You're at a great company. Take advantage of all of this stuff. All this information is great information to put in to then sift through. But I would really, look, learn, listen, and then leap.
I like that. You may hear that. I'll attribute it, obviously, but one of the things that I think you mentioned caused me to think about this. How much has your motivation been refined or shifted as you went through up to this point in your career? Because you still have a lot of career left, and but has your motivational force changed, or has it just become more refined?
I think it's just become more refined, and I'm pretty clear about how I want to spend my time. and how I want to motivate myself in my life. And I have the luxury, because, I don't have kids, to be a lot more flexible. But then I have to be a lot more disciplined too, right? In some respects. um, and I I do think that although recognition was something that motivated me, um, over time, I've really realized am I doing work that matters? Am I doing work that really matters? And so I am passionate about people's health and wellness. And that comes in a lot of different forms. And it's actually helped me make a leap into working alongside healthcare, traditional healthcare, but other healthcare and health and wellness areas that I think really do help our wellness and our well-being. Um, Healthcare is an amazing industry. I am very saddened that it's always sick people that have to come to us. Um, and I really wanted to get onto the side of, like, how do I help people stay well or feel great, even if they have a sickness, right? Um, and I think it's possible to live in both worlds. At least I've been able to lately, so it's good.
I think it's more than possible. Your purpose, your motivation for doing what you do shines so clearly out of you that it doesn't take long for an individual to know you and have conversation with you to be absolutely clear about your commitment to helping people get well. And you've chosen a tool that I think way back there, people didn't always realize what a tool for health and wellness technology was going to be. I think
Right.
I think 2 years ago people didn't realize that. So wow, not just a leader, but a little bit of an oracle.
It's whatever we can get to help us live the best lives that we have, right?
And that is
Whatever
one of
those.
the reasons. Yeah, that is absolutely one of the reasons for this series of interviews, is because I want people to have the chance to expand their frame of reference and to hear how other people have made their journey up to the point that they're in right now, because those journeys aren't ending.
No.
Some of them are starting, and some of them people have pulled off and they're sitting at the rest stop saying, okay, wait a minute. This isn't exactly what I had in mind. What do I do now? How do I go forward? And I had forgotten about the four sides. I'm going to have to relook
Well,
that.
I'll send you mine, and I'll show you. Just it's a great exercise that we all did, and it's a way to introduce yourself to the team and also to your leadership, and how they can. It's sort of a win-win for them because they start to see the benefit. Yeah.
Well, I think it's also a chance to reflect on it. And
Yeah.
many of us, grew up in an era where you got to work, you then sat down and worked, and you were heads down until your stomach reminded you you hadn't had lunch, and then you go run back and you were heads down again, and you did the work. And for some of us, why we were doing that particular work didn't occur until a little bit later, or
Right.
a lot later. So I think it's a wonderful service, not just a great communication tool. And it sure beats the icebreaker exercises of, hi, my name is KimiKSP, and I went to school and specialized in IT and got my master's in business administration. But, okay, fine. I could read that on your bio on LinkedIn.
Right.
That
I
doesn't
think it's more
make
interesting
sense.
to actually get to know the person a little bit more personalized pieces. And you were saying, like, getting stuck on the side of the road. I'll say my careers, because I've had a number of careers.
Yeah.
They have come with some of those aha and oh no moments, and where I have felt like the rug was ripped out from underneath me. But those sometimes were the most refreshing, to sort of say, okay, so now what? Now what are you going to do? Now what are you going to do? And it is tough, because I had a couple of those, kind of trying to figure out what the next career should be or where should I go. Um, And there's there's so much out there now for women, and there's so many great role models that I think, the world is the oyster, or many oysters for women, in particular. And I just think I have a niece who I'm so excited for whatever her career is going to be, because I think she's going to have so many great uh, industries to go into, and women to look up to. And I think it is important that we see people like us in roles that we might aspire to be. I heard someone, I think, we're, watching Kamala Harris be inducted into the VP role. It was, it was huge to see that and to think, gosh, and there's a Mr. First Lady man or whatever. I'm not
the
really
second
sure
gentleman.
The second
That cracks me up every time I hear it.
And the first lady, well, whatever it is, I just thought it was so amazing to see such an accomplished woman have the opportunity to be in that role, and to take over that position and to lead for us. And I was really inspired because I grew up in an era where the best job a guy could have would be the president of the United States. Not so much anymore, to be honest. I think the best job that a woman could have would be vice president or even president of the United States. So, I think it's so cool to be living in this era of change.
It's really exciting. I can't wait to see what happens next. We have so many things that have occurred, and yet, as many have reminded us recently, we're not done yet.
No.
And we're not done by a long shot, but the choices that young women have now that may have been available when we were younger, but it wasn't as visible. So availability without visibility is worth nothing. And
Yeah.
they've got choices that I think are going to bode well for
Huge.
society in general, if I may be so bold. So
Yes.
thank you very much, Francie, because,
Thank
well, A,
you.
I always love an excuse to talk with you. But B, I think that your sense of passion and mission and optimism without being pedantic, just because somebody's passionate about something doesn't necessarily mean they don't see the rest of the world. And I've always thought that you're a great example of the broad vision of where a woman's leadership fit into her life and into society as a whole. So thank you so much for taking
Thank you for the
this.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I really, really appreciate the dialogue and the thoughtfulness that it allowed me to sort of take about where I am and where I'm going. Because I didn't just think about where I was, but it made me think about where am I going and how am I going to continue this and what am I doing right now to create the next kind of the iteration or spin on what I get to do in the next 20 years.
It's been a lot of fun when I send questions to people ahead of time and say, this is what I would like you to think about, please. I get a great deal of fun trying to imagine what the thought processes are, and I almost wish I could be a fly on the wall, but thank you again. I really appreciate it, and I know anybody who listens to this will have walked away with a sliver of wisdom or a suggestion that they can take and put into action. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.